Robert Thompson adjusted his expensive watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The gold face caught the afternoon light streaming through the massive windows of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel lobby. His heart was racing, but not from excitement. This was pure anxiety mixed with determination. The marble floor beneath his Italian leather shoes had witnessed countless business deals over the years. Today, it might witness either his greatest triumph or his most devastating failure. Robert pulled out his phone and checked the time again. The call was scheduled to start in exactly 2 minutes. He had been building his real estate empire for over 20 years. What started as a small property management company had grown into something he never imagined possible. Hotels, shopping centers, apartment buildings across 3 states. But success in business is like climbing a mountain. The higher you go, the more dangerous each step becomes. The phone buzzed in his hand. This was it. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Robert said, pressing the phone to his ear while walking toward the center of the lobby. The space was enormous, with crystal chandeliers hanging from a ceiling that seemed to touch the sky. A few guests sat in leather chairs, reading newspapers or tapping on their laptops. "Robert, we've been waiting," came the voice of Mr. Chun, the lead investor from Singapore. His English was perfect, but there was something cold in his tone that made Robert's stomach tighten. "Yes, sorry about that. I wanted to make sure we had privacy for this discussion." Robert began pacing, his free hand gesturing as if the investors could see him. This was a habit he had developed over the years. Moving helped him think. "Let's get straight to the point," said another voice. This was Mr. Rodriguez from Mexico City. "We've reviewed your proposal for the downtown development project. $200 million is a significant investment." Robert felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the hotel's perfect air conditioning. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns, but this project will transform the entire downtown area. We're not just building apartments and shops. We're creating a community." He walked past the grand piano sitting in the corner of the lobby. The instrument was beautiful, made of polished black wood that reflected the chandelier lights like a mirror. No one was playing it now, but Robert had heard music coming from it many times during his visits to this hotel. "The numbers look good on paper," Mr. Chun continued, "but the market has been unpredictable lately. Real estate prices in your city have been falling for 6 months. Robert's jaw tightened. This was the challenge he had been expecting. That's exactly why this is the perfect time to buy. Prices are low, which means we can acquire more land for less money. When the market recovers, and it always does, our profits will be enormous." He could hear papers rustling on the other end of the call. These investors were careful people. They didn't throw money around without thinking everything through. Robert respected that, but it also made deals like this incredibly stressful. "What about the competition?" asked Mr. Rodriguez. "Johnson Development Group is planning a similar project just 2 miles away. They have more experience with projects this size." Robert stopped walking for a moment. Johnson Development was his biggest rival. They had been competing for projects for years, and Johnson usually won because they had deeper pockets. But Robert was smarter, more creative. He found opportunities where others saw problems. "Johnson thinks big means better," Robert said, resuming his pace. "But I've spent months studying this location. The traffic patterns, the demographics, the local culture. Johnson will build something that looks impressive but doesn't fit the community. We're building something that belongs there." A family walked through the lobby, pulling suitcases behind them. The parents looked tired from traveling, but their young daughter was full of energy, skipping alongside them and looking around at everything with wide eyes. Robert barely noticed them as he focused on the voices in his phone. "Tell us about the timeline," Mr. Chun said. "When do you expect to break ground?" "If we finalize the funding this week, we can start construction in 3 months. The first phase will be completed within 18 months. That's apartments and retail space. The second phase, which includes the office buildings and the hotel, will be finished within 3 years. Robert had walked this timeline through his mind hundreds of times. Every detail was planned, every potential problem had a solution. This wasn't just another project for him, this was his legacy. The city council has already approved the project? Mr. Rodriguez asked, full approval. We've been working with them for 8 months. They want this development as much as we do. It will bring jobs, increase tax revenue, and revitalize an area that has been struggling since the old factory closed down. Robert could feel the conversation reaching a critical point. These investors weren't just being careful. They were looking for reasons to say no. In his experience, when people wanted to invest, they asked about opportunities. When they were hesitant, they focused on risks. Robert, we need to be honest with you, Mr. Chun said after a pause. We have some concerns about your company's debt levels. You've been very aggressive with expansion over the past 2 years. This was the moment Robert had been dreading. Yes, he had borrowed heavily to fund recent projects. But that's how business worked. You had to spend money to make money. Playing it safe meant staying small forever. Debt is just another tool, Robert replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Every successful company carries debt. The key is making sure your income exceeds your expenses. Our current projects are all profitable and ahead of schedule. But if this project fails, Mr. Rodriguez said slowly, it could put your entire company at risk. Robert felt his heart skip a beat. These words were like a punch to the stomach, but they weren't wrong. This project was big enough to either secure his company's future or destroy everything he had built. There was no middle ground. Gentlemen, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen good markets and bad markets. I've seen companies rise and fall. The ones that survive are the ones willing to take calculated risks when others are too scared to move. He was near the windows now, looking out at the city street. Cars moved slowly through afternoon traffic. People walked on sidewalks, going about their daily lives. Most of them would never know or care about this conversation, but it would affect all of them if the project moved forward. We understand your passion, Mr. Chun said, but passion doesn't guarantee success. We need guarantees. What happens if construction costs exceed your estimates? What happens if the market doesn't recover as quickly as you expect? Robert closed his eyes for a moment. These were fair questions, but they were also impossible to answer with certainty. Business was about managing uncertainty, not eliminating it. I have contingency plans for every scenario, he said. Cost overruns, market delays, economic downturns. I've been preparing for this project longer than any other in my career. The lobby around him continued its quiet afternoon rhythm. Hotel? Staff moved efficiently between tasks. Guests came and went. Life continued while Robert's entire future hung in the balance of this single phone call. We need some time to discuss this among ourselves, Mr. Rodriguez said finally. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow? Robert felt his stomach drop. In his experience, when investors asked for time to think, they were usually looking for a polite way to say no. Robert felt his world crumbling as the investors asked for more time. In business, delay usually meant rejection wrapped in polite words. His hand gripped the phone tighter, knuckles turning white against the black device. Of course, take all the time you need, he managed to say, though his voice betrayed the frustration building inside him. But I should mention that I have other investors interested in this project. I can't hold the opportunity indefinitely. It was a bluff and probably not a very good one. But sometimes in business, you had to pretend to have more power than you actually possessed. The silence on the other end of the call stretched uncomfortably long. We understand, Mr. Chun finally replied. We'll have an answer for you by tomorrow evening. As Robert continued pacing near the hotel's massive windows, he barely noticed the family that had entered the lobby earlier. The parents were now at the reception desk, dealing with paperwork and room keys. Their daughter, maybe 7 or 8 years old, had wandered away from them. Children have a way of finding wonder in places where adults only see routine. While her parents focused on check-in procedures, the little girl's attention was captured by something far more interesting than hotel paperwork. The grand piano sat in its usual spot, elegant and inviting. Most people walked past it without a second glance, but this child saw possibility where others saw decoration. Her small feet carried her across the marble floor, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't explain. "Robert, are you still there?" Mr. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the phone. "Yes, sorry. I was just reviewing some numbers," Robert lied, refocusing on the conversation that would determine his future. The little girl reached the piano bench and climbed up carefully. Her legs were too short to reach the floor properly, so she had to scoot forward on the leather seat. The piano was enormous compared to her tiny frame, but she wasn't intimidated. "We'll need to see updated financial projections," Mr. Chun continued, "particularly regarding cash flow in the first 2 years of operation." Robert nodded, even though no one could see him. "I can have those to you first thing tomorrow morning. My accountant has been working on several different scenarios." Meanwhile, the child placed her small hands on the piano keys. She didn't start playing immediately. Instead, she sat quietly for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her parents were still busy at the reception desk, completely unaware that their daughter had found her way to the hotel's centerpiece. The lobby was large enough that conversations happening in different areas couldn't easily be overheard. "One more thing," Mr. Rodriguez added. "We'd like to visit the construction site next week. See the land firsthand before making our final decision." "Absolutely," Robert agreed. "I'll arrange a full tour. You'll be able to see exactly why this location is perfect for the project." The conversation was winding down, but Robert felt more anxious than relieved. Tomorrow evening seemed like a lifetime away. His entire company's future would be decided in the next 24 hours. Just as he was about to say goodbye to the investors, something unexpected happened. A sound filled the lobby that made Robert pause mid-sentence. Piano music. At first, he thought the hotel had started playing recorded music through hidden speakers. But as he listened more carefully, he realized someone was actually playing the piano. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something strange about it. "Robert, are you there?" Mr. Chen's voice seemed to come from far away. "Yes, I'm here. Just give me one moment." Robert looked around the lobby, trying to locate the source of the music. That's when he saw her. The little girl from the family that had checked in was sitting at the piano, her tiny fingers moving across the keys with surprising skill. But something was off about her playing. The melody she was producing was definitely classical. Definitely beautiful, but it felt backward. Somehow, like she was playing a familiar song in reverse order. Robert had heard enough piano music in his lifetime to recognize when something wasn't quite right. "We'll speak tomorrow then," Mr. Rodriguez was saying. "Yes, tomorrow," Robert replied automatically. But his attention was completely focused on the child and her strange performance. The melody was Clair de Lune, one of the most beautiful piano pieces ever written. Robert knew it well because his own daughter had played it countless times before her accident 3 years ago. But this child was playing it backward, note by note, with perfect precision. "Have a good evening, Robert. You too." "Thank you for your time." The call ended, but Robert barely noticed. His phone slowly lowered from his ear as he stood transfixed by what he was hearing. The music seemed to wrap around him, pulling him into memories he had spent years trying to avoid. The little girl's playing was flawless. Every note was exactly where it should be, but in reverse order. It should have sounded wrong, confused, maybe even unpleasant. Instead, it was the most beautiful thing Robert had heard in years. Other people in the lobby had started to notice too. Conversations were getting quieter as guests turned to listen. Hotel staff paused in their duties to appreciate the unexpected performance, but for Robert, this wasn't just beautiful music, it was impossible music. Clair de Lune, played backward, was something his daughter had tried to learn in her final weeks of life. She had called it her secret project, claiming that playing the song in reverse would reveal its hidden meaning. His daughter had never mastered it. The reverse timing was too difficult, the finger positions too awkward. She had died in the car accident before she could figure it out. Yet here was this strange child, playing it perfectly as if she had been practicing for years. Robert found himself walking toward the piano without conscious decision. His feet carried him across the marble floor, past leather chairs and small tables, past other guests who were equally mesmerized by the performance. The child seemed completely unaware of her audience. Her eyes were closed, her small body swaying slightly with the rhythm of the backward melody. She looked peaceful, almost in a trance state. As Robert got closer, he could see her fingers more clearly. They moved with the confidence of someone much older, someone who had been playing piano for decades rather than years. But she couldn't be more than 8 years old. The music continued to flow from the piano, each backward note perfect and purposeful. Robert felt tears forming in his eyes, though he couldn't explain why. The melody was bringing back memories of his daughter, but also something else. Something he couldn't quite identify. When the child finally reached the end of the piece, which was really the beginning of Clair de Lune played in proper order, the lobby fell into complete silence. For a moment, no one moved. The performance had been so unexpected, so beautiful, that everyone needed a moment to process what they had just experienced. Then, slowly, applause began to fill the space. Guests and hotel staff alike showed their appreciation for the impromptu concert. But the little girl didn't seem to notice the clapping. She kept her eyes closed, her hands still resting on the piano keys. Robert was now standing just a few feet away from the piano bench, close enough to see the child's face clearly, close enough to notice something that made his heart stop. She was smiling. But it wasn't the smile of a child who had just performed for an audience. It was the smile of someone who had just delivered an important message. Robert's phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the lobby, but he didn't bend down to pick it up. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't process what he had just witnessed. The applause around him seemed to fade into nothing. The voices of other guests became distant whispers. The entire world had narrowed down to just him and this small child sitting at the piano bench. Still smiling that knowing smile, his mind raced back 3 years to a sunny Saturday morning in his daughter's bedroom. She had been sitting at her own piano, much smaller than this grand hotel instrument, struggling with sheet music spread across the wooden stand. "Dad, listen to this," she had said, her voice full of excitement. "I'm trying to play Clair de Lune backward. Mrs. Peterson says it's impossible, but I think she's wrong." Robert had been getting ready for a business meeting that morning. He was always getting ready for business meetings back then. Always rushing somewhere, always focused on the next deal, the next opportunity. "That sounds interesting, honey," he had replied while adjusting his tie in the mirror. "But I really need to leave soon. Can you show me when I get back tonight?" She had nodded, disappointed but understanding. She was always understanding when work pulled him away. Too understanding, he realized now. "I think the song has a secret message," she had continued, her small fingers picking out individual notes. "Like it's trying to tell us something, but we have to play it backward to hear it properly." Robert had smiled at her imagination while checking his watch. Children saw magic everywhere, even in simple piano music. He thought it was cute, but not particularly important. Just another one of her creative ideas that would be forgotten by next week. "Dad, do you think music can carry messages from one person to another?" she had asked as he picked up his briefcase. "I think music can make people feel things," he had answered, already mentally preparing for his presentation. "But messages? That might be giving it too much credit." She had turned back to the piano, determined to prove her theory. Those were among the last words they had spoken about music. 3 days later she was gone. Now, standing in this hotel lobby, Robert felt those memories crushing down on him like a physical weight. The child at the piano had just played his daughter's impossible song. Not only played it, but played it perfectly. The little girl finally opened her eyes and looked directly at him. Her gaze was steady and calm, far too mature for someone her age. When their eyes met, Robert felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening in a room that had been locked for years. "Are you okay, sir?" Robert turned to see a hotel employee standing beside him, concern written across his face. The young man was probably wondering why a grown businessman was standing motionless in the middle of the lobby, staring at a child. "I'm fine," Robert managed to say, though his voice sounded strange even to himself. "Just enjoying the music." The employee nodded and walked away, but Robert could tell he was still worried. From the outside, Robert probably looked like he was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the child had turned away from the piano now and was looking around the lobby as if seeing it for the first time. Her parents were still at the reception desk, finally finishing their check-in process. They hadn't even noticed their daughter's performance. Robert bent down slowly to pick up his phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, spider web lines. Running across the glass? Somehow that seemed appropriate. Everything in his life felt fractured right now. As he straightened up, the little girl had climbed down from the piano bench and was walking toward him. Robert's heart started beating faster. Part of him wanted to run away, to escape before whatever was happening here went any further, but his feet remained planted on the marble floor. "You dropped your phone," she said when she reached him. Her voice was soft and gentle, with just a hint of concern. "Yes, I did." Robert looked down at the damaged device in his hand. "I was listening to your playing. It was very beautiful." "Thank you." She tilted her head slightly, studying his face. "You looked sad when I was playing. Did the music make you sad?" Robert felt his throat tighten. How could he explain to a child that her music had torn open 3 years of carefully buried grief? How could he tell her that she had just played a song that connected him to the most painful loss of his life? "Sometimes beautiful music can make people feel many different things," he said carefully. "Happy and sad at the same time." She nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "My grandmother says music is like a bridge. It can take you to places you've been before, even if those places are far away." The simple wisdom in her words hit Robert harder than any business presentation he had ever heard. Music as a bridge. His daughter had said something similar once, talking about how certain songs could transport her to different moods and memories. "That's a very smart grandmother," Robert said. "She taught me to play piano. But she didn't teach me that song. I learned it from someone else." Robert felt his pulse quicken. "Oh, who taught you to play Clair de Lune backward?" The child looked at him with those two old eyes again. For a moment, she seemed to be deciding whether to tell him something important. Friend taught me," she said finally. "She comes to visit me sometimes in my dreams. She's about my age, and she has long brown hair like mine. She said someday I would meet someone who really needed to hear that song played the right way." Robert's legs felt weak. His daughter had long brown hair. His daughter had been working on this exact piece of music. His daughter had believed the song contained a hidden message. "This friend of yours," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Does she have a name?" The little girl smiled again, that same knowing expression that seemed far beyond her years. "She told me her name, but she said I should only tell it to the right person. Someone who would understand why the song is important." Robert knelt down. So he was at eye level with the child. Around them, the hotel lobby continued its normal afternoon rhythm. People walked past carrying luggage. Staff members cleaned tables and watered plants. Life went on as usual, even though Robert felt like his entire understanding of reality was crumbling. "How will you know if someone is the right person?" he asked. "She said I would know because they would cry when they heard the song," the child replied. "And because they would look like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time." Robert realized there were tears running down his cheeks. He hadn't even felt them starting to fall. The little girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissues, offering him one with the natural kindness that children possessed before the world taught them to be suspicious. "Thank you," he said, accepting the tissue and wiping his eyes. "Are you the right person?" she asked gently. Robert looked into her innocent face and saw something that made his breath catch. For just a moment, in the curve of her smile and the warmth in her eyes, he saw his daughter. Not this child transformed into his daughter, but rather some echo or reflection of the love he had lost. "I think I might be," he whispered. The little girl waited patiently while Robert composed himself. She didn't seem uncomfortable with his tears or confused by his emotional reaction. If anything, she appeared to have been expecting this exact response. "What's your name?" Robert asked after wiping his eyes with the tissue she had given him. "Lucy," she replied. "What's yours?" "Robert." "I'm very pleased to meet you, Lucy." He managed a small smile. "That was the most beautiful piano performance I've ever heard." Lucy's face lit up with genuine happiness. "Really? I was worried I might make mistakes." "The backward part is really hard to remember. You didn't make any mistakes. It was perfect." Robert paused, still struggling to believe what was happening. "Lucy, can I ask you something about your friend? The one who taught you the song?" "Sure." Lucy sat down on a nearby leather chair, swinging her short legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Robert pulled another chair closer and sat down facing her. Around them, the hotel lobby continued its quiet afternoon pace, but their conversation felt completely separate from the outside world. "How long have you been having these dreams?" Robert asked gently. Lucy scrunched up her face, thinking, maybe 2 years? "She started visiting me after we moved to our new house. Grandma says sometimes when people move to new places, they become more open to special experiences. 2 years ago would have been about a year after his daughter's accident." Robert felt goosebumps rising on his arms despite the warm temperature. "In the lobby, what does your friend look like?" he continued. "She's really pretty. Long brown hair that she sometimes wears in braids, big brown eyes. She always wears this blue dress with little white flowers on it." Lucy's description was clear and detailed as if she was looking at a photograph. Robert's hands began to tremble. The blue dress with white flowers had been his daughter's favorite. She had worn it to her last piano recital, just 2 weeks before the accident. He had bought it for her birthday, and she had loved it so much that she wanted to wear it for every special occasion. "She sounds very nice," Robert managed to say. "Oh, she is. She's really funny, too. She tells me jokes and stories about her dad. She talks about him a lot." Lucy's expression grew more serious. "But she's also kind of sad sometimes." "Sad about what?" "She misses her dad. She says he used to listen to her play piano, but then something happened and now he can't hear her anymore. She's been trying really hard to find a way to talk to him again." Robert felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. His chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Everything Lucy was saying lined up perfectly with his own experience, his own loss. "Lucy," he said carefully, "did your friend ever tell you what happened to her?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "She was in a car accident, a really bad one. She said she was going to piano lessons and it was raining and another car couldn't stop in time. Those were exactly the circumstances of his daughter's accident." Robert had relived that rainy Tuesday afternoon thousands of times in his mind. The other driver had been elderly, with poor reflexes made worse by the wet roads. No one was really to blame, which somehow made it even harder to bear. "She said the hardest part wasn't being hurt," Lucy continued. The hardest part was knowing her dad would be sad and she couldn't do anything to help him feel better." Tears started flowing down Robert's cheeks again. This was impossible. No one knew these details about his daughter's thoughts or feelings. No one could know what she might have been thinking in those final moments. "Lucy, what's your friend's name?" Robert asked, though he was almost afraid to hear the answer. Lucy looked at him with those wise, gentle eyes. "She said I should tell you her name is Katie, and she said to tell you that she's sorry she never got to finish learning the backward song while she was alive." Robert's world stopped. Katie, his daughter's name. The name he hadn't spoken aloud to anyone in over a year, because it hurt too much. "She also said," Lucy continued, apparently not noticing Robert's shock, "that you should know she doesn't blame you for what happened. She said you've been thinking it was your fault, but it wasn't. She said accidents just happen sometimes, even to good people." Robert buried his face in his hands. The guilt had been eating away at him for 3 years. If he hadn't insisted on piano lessons that day, if he had driven her himself instead of letting her take the bus, if he had been a better father, more present, more protective. "How could she possibly know what I've been thinking?" Robert whispered. "She says she watches over you sometimes." She's worried because you stopped doing things you used to love. She says you used to laugh a lot more and you used to play music yourself. This was true. Robert had played guitar in college, even performed in a small band. After Katie died, he had put his guitar in the closet and never touched it again. Music reminded him too much of her, of the joy they had shared together. She wants you to know, Lucy said, her voice becoming very serious, that the backward song isn't just a trick. It's like a message. She figured out how to play it after the accident, and now she can use it to show people that love doesn't end just because someone dies. Robert looked up at Lucy, this remarkable child who was somehow delivering the most important message he had ever received. She picked me to learn the song because she said I have a special gift for hearing music that comes from faraway places. My grandmother says some people are born with abilities like that, and she knew I would be here today? Robert asked. Lucy shook her head. She didn't know exactly when or where, but she said if I kept playing the backward song whenever I felt like I was supposed to, eventually the right person would hear it. She said I would know because they would understand what the music really meant. Robert sat back in his chair, trying to process everything Lucy had told him. Part of his rational mind insisted this was all coincidence. Children had vivid imaginations. Sometimes they convinced themselves that dreams were real, but another part of him, a part that had been dormant for 3 years, was awakening. The details were too specific, too accurate. Lucy knew things about Katie that no one else could possibly know. Lucy, does your friend visit you in dreams often? Not as much as she used to. She said once I delivered her message, she probably wouldn't need to visit anymore. She said she has other things to do now, other ways to help people. The thought of losing this connection, even secondhand, made Robert panic slightly. What if I have questions for her? What if I want to tell her something? Lucy smiled. She said you don't need me to talk to her. She said once you start believing she's still around, you'll be able to feel her presence all by yourself. You just have to pay attention and listen with your heart instead of your head. At that moment, Lucy's parents approached their little group. They had finally finished checking in and were looking around for their daughter. There you are, sweetheart, Lucy's mother said. We've been looking everywhere for you. I was making a new friend, Lucy replied, standing up from her chair. This is Mr. Robert. He liked my piano playing. Robert stood as well, extending his hand to Lucy's parents. Your daughter is incredibly talented. She played a beautiful piece for everyone in the lobby. Oh my, Lucy's father said. I hope she wasn't bothering anyone. She has a habit of finding pianos wherever we go. She wasn't bothering anyone at all. In fact, she made my entire day better. Lucy looked up at Robert one more time before leaving with her parents. Remember what I told you, she said quietly, and remember that love is like music. It can travel farther than most people think. As Robert watched the family walk toward the hotel elevators, he felt something shifting deep inside his chest. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight of grief felt just a little bit lighter. Robert stood alone in the hotel lobby for a long time after Lucy and her family disappeared into the elevator. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting different shadows across the marble floor. The grand piano sat silent again, as if the magical performance had never happened. But it had happened. Robert knew it with absolute certainty, even though his logical mind kept trying to find reasonable explanations. Children sometimes knew things they shouldn't know. Coincidences occurred. People heard what they wanted to hear, yet none of those explanations could account for the specific details Lucy had shared: the blue dress with white flowers, the backward version of Claire de Lune, Katie's exact thoughts about the accident. These weren't things a child could guess or imagine. Robert picked up his cracked phone and stared at the damaged screen. His business call with the investors seemed like it had happened in another lifetime, though only an hour had passed. The deal that had consumed his thoughts for months now felt distant and unimportant. He needed answers. He needed to understand what had just happened to him. The hotel's front desk was busy with the usual afternoon check-ins, but Robert waited patiently until one of the clerks became available. The young woman behind the counter smiled professionally. As he approached, Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you? I was wondering if you could tell me about the family that just checked in. They have a young daughter named Lucy who was playing piano in the lobby. The clerk's smile faltered slightly. Hotels were careful about guest privacy, and Robert's question probably sounded suspicious. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't share information about our guests. Hotel policy, you understand. Robert realized how his request must sound to her. A middle-aged businessman asking about a child's family would raise red flags for any responsible employee. Of course, I understand completely, Robert said quickly. I was just impressed by the little girl's piano playing. I thought her parents might like to know that she has real talent. This seemed to ease the clerk's concerns somewhat. Oh, you heard her playing? She is quite gifted, isn't she? I heard the music from back here and was amazed. Do you know where they're visiting from? Robert asked, trying to sound casual. I believe they mentioned they're from a small town about 3 hours north of here. Her grandmother was very sweet when she made the reservation. She said this was a special trip for her granddaughter. Robert thanked the clerk and walked away, his mind racing. 3 hours north would put Lucy's hometown in a rural area where everyone probably knew everyone else. If he could find out which town, he might be able to learn more about Lucy and her unusual abilities, but even as he considered this, Robert wondered what exactly he was hoping to discover. What would he do if he found out that Lucy really did have supernatural experiences? What would he do if he found out she didn't? He found a quiet corner of the lobby and sat down to think. For 3 years he had built walls around his grief. He had thrown himself into work, avoided anything that reminded him of Katie, and convinced himself that moving forward meant leaving the past behind. Now those walls were crumbling, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what lay beneath them. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message from his assistant, reminding him about a meeting scheduled for the next morning. The business world was calling him back to reality, but he couldn't focus on spreadsheets and profit margins right now. Instead, he found himself walking back to the grand piano. The bench was empty, the lid closed over the keys. But as he approached, Robert could almost hear the echo of Lucy's backward melody still hanging in the air. He sat down on the bench and lifted the lid, revealing the black and white keys that had produced such impossible music an hour earlier. Robert hadn't played piano since he was a teenager, but his fingers remembered the basic positions. Slowly, hesitantly, he began to pick out the opening notes of Clair de Lune. The melody came back to him gradually, muscle memory from years ago, combining with memories of listening to Katie practice this same piece. But when he tried to play the notes backward, the way Lucy had done, his fingers stumbled. The timing was wrong, the rhythm felt awkward. What had seemed effortless for Lucy was nearly impossible for him. After several failed attempts, Robert gave up and simply played the song normally. Even his rusty technique couldn't diminish the beauty of the composition. As the familiar melody filled the lobby, he felt Katie's presence more strongly than he had since the day she died. "Excuse me, are you Robert Thompson?" Robert looked up to see an elderly woman standing beside the piano. She had silver hair and kind eyes, and something about her seemed familiar. "Yes, I am. I'm Dorothy Chun, Lucy's grandmother. She told me I should come find you." Robert's heart started beating faster. "Lucy sent you to find me?" Dorothy smiled and sat down on a nearby chair. "That child has always been special, but lately she's been having the most extraordinary experiences. She insisted I come down here to talk to you before we went up to our room." "About what?" "About the dreams she's been having. About the little girl who visits her and teaches her music." Dorothy paused, studying Robert's face carefully. "She told me you would understand because you've lost someone important to you." Robert felt tears threatening again. "Your granddaughter played a song that my daughter was trying to learn before she died. Played it perfectly in a way my daughter never could." Dorothy nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "Lucy has been having these dreams for almost 2 years now. At first, I thought it was just her imagination, the way children process the world around them. But the details became too specific, too consistent." "What kind of details?" "The girl in her dreams always appears in the same blue dress with white flowers. She always talks about her father who misses her terribly. She always asks Lucy to learn songs that she says will help people heal from sadness. Robert gripped the edge of the piano bench. Has Lucy ever mentioned the name Katie? Every time. She says Katie is her teacher, her friend, her guide. Katie shows her how to play pieces that Lucy has never heard before, songs that somehow carry messages of comfort and hope. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. I started writing down everything Lucy told me about these dreams. I thought maybe someday it would be important for someone to know. She handed the notebook to Robert. As he flipped through the pages, he saw detailed descriptions of Katie's appearance, her personality, her love of music. But more than that, he saw records of conversations that could only have come from someone who knew Katie intimately. According to Lucy's notes, Dorothy continued, Katie has been trying for a long time to reach her father. She said she needed to find someone who could play music well enough to deliver her message properly. And she chose Lucy? Katie told Lucy that some people are born with the ability to hear voices from faraway places. Lucy has always been sensitive to things other people miss. Even as a very small child, she would have conversations with invisible friends, play games with people who weren't there. Robert looked up from the notebook. Do you believe Lucy is really communicating with my daughter? Dorothy was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. I've lived long enough to know that the world contains mysteries we don't understand. I've also raised enough children to know the difference between imagination and something deeper. She stood up and placed a gentle hand on Robert's shoulder. What I believe is that Lucy has been given a gift, and that gift led her to you today. Whether that gift comes from your daughter's spirit or from some other source doesn't change the fact that you needed to hear what Lucy had to say. She told me that Katie doesn't blame me for the accident. Do you blame yourself? Robert's voice came out as barely a whisper. Every day for 3 years. Then maybe it's time to listen to the message, regardless of where it comes from. Dorothy started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Mr. Thompson? Lucy wanted me to tell you one more thing. She said Katie wants you to know that music was never about perfection. It was about love. And love doesn't end just because the music stops. As Robert watched Dorothy disappear toward the elevators, he looked down at the notebook in his hands. Page after page of impossible knowledge, delivered through the dreams of a child he had met just hours ago. For the first time in 3 years, Robert felt like he might be ready to believe in something beyond his own grief. Robert sat in his car in the hotel parking lot for over an hour, staring at Dorothy's notebook without really reading it. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of the evenings he used to spend listening to Katie practice piano. Back then, he had always been in a hurry, always checking his watch, thinking about tomorrow's meetings, mentally preparing for the next business challenge. He had loved listening to Katie play, but even those precious moments had been filtered through his constant preoccupation with work. Now, for the first time in years, Robert had nowhere urgent to be. His phone had been buzzing with messages and calls, but he had turned the volume off. The investors could wait, the meetings could be rescheduled. For once in his adult life, something was more important than business. He opened the notebook again and began reading more carefully. Dorothy's handwriting was neat and precise, recording Lucy's dreams with the attention to detail of someone who understood their importance. March 15th. Lucy woke up excited. Sighed. Katie taught her a new song about forgiveness. Katie told her that holding on to anger is like carrying rocks in your backpack. It just makes everything harder. Robert remembered that exact phrase. Katie had said those words to him when he was angry about a business deal that had fallen through. She had been only 7 years old, but somehow she had the wisdom to help him see that his frustration was hurting him more than anyone else. April 2nd, Katie told Lucy that her dad stopped playing music after she died. Song of music reminds him of her, but she wishes he knew that music is how she stays close to him. This hit Robert like a physical blow. He had put his guitar away 3 years ago and never touched it again. Looking at it in the closet had been too painful, too full of memories of the songs he and Katie used to play together. May 18th, Lucy said Katie is worried about her dad's health. He works too much and doesn't sleep enough. Katie wants him to know that she's proud of his success, but not if it comes at the cost of his happiness. Robert laughed bitterly. Katie had always been concerned about his work habits, even as a young child. She would remind him to eat dinner when he stayed late at the office. She would draw pictures of the two of them spending time together and leave them on his desk. After her death, work had become his escape from grief. If he stayed busy enough, focused enough on deals and meetings and profits, he could sometimes go hours without thinking about his loss. But the escape had become a prison, and now he couldn't remember the last time he had felt genuinely happy about anything. Page after page of the notebook contained insights that could only have come from Katie, her sense of humor, her concern for others, her unique way of seeing the world. It was all there, recorded in Lucy's innocent words. But as Robert read deeper into the notebook, he began to see a pattern that both comforted and troubled him. Katie's messages weren't just about maintaining connection with him. They were about helping him move forward. June 10th, Katie said her dad has been living his life backwards, just like the song, moving away from love instead of toward it. She wants him to turn around and start walking in the right direction again. Robert closed the notebook and leaned back in his car seat. The metaphor was crystal clear. For 3 years he had been moving away from everything that had brought him joy. Away from music, away from meaningful relationships, away from any activity that might remind him of Katie. He had convinced himself that this was how grief worked, that moving forward meant leaving the past behind, that healing required forgetting. But Katie's message through Lucy suggested something completely different, that love didn't end with death, that moving forward didn't mean moving away, that healing meant learning to carry love with you rather than trying to escape from it. Robert's phone buzzed with another call from his assistant. This time he answered, "Mr. Thompson, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The investors have been calling. They want to move up tomorrow's meeting." "Cancel it," Robert said without hesitation. "Cancel it? But sir, this is the biggest deal of your career. You said it could make or break the company." Robert looked at the hotel through his windshield, thinking about Lucy playing piano in the lobby, about impossible music carrying messages of love across the boundary between life and death. "You're right, it could make or break the company. But maybe that's not the most important thing anymore." "I don't understand, sir. I'm starting to think I've been measuring success all wrong. Cancel the meeting. Tell them we'll reschedule when I'm ready." After he hung up, Robert sat in the quiet of his car and tried to imagine what Katie would think of his business empire. She had been proud of his success, but she had also worried about the cost. She had wanted him to be happy, not just wealthy. The truth was, Robert couldn't remember the last time his work had brought him genuine satisfaction. Somewhere along the way, building his company had stopped being about creating something meaningful and had become about proving something to himself. And others. Maybe Katie's backward song was trying to tell him that he had been moving in the wrong direction for longer than just the 3 years since her death. Maybe he had been prioritizing the wrong things for much longer than that. Robert started his car and drove slowly through the city streets. Instead of heading toward his downtown office or his empty house in the suburbs, he found himself driving toward the cemetery where Katie was buried. He hadn't visited her grave in over a year. The last time he had gone, the pain had been so overwhelming that he had promised himself he wouldn't go back. But now, with Lucy's words and Dorothy's notebook fresh in his mind, the cemetery felt like where he needed to be. The sun was setting as Robert parked near Katie's grave. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind moving through the trees. As he walked across the grass toward her headstone, Robert felt nervous, as if he was about to have an important conversation with someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Katie's grave was simple but beautiful. A small granite stone with her name, her dates, and the words "beloved daughter" carved in elegant script. Robert had chosen those words 3 years ago, but now they seemed insufficient to capture everything she had been. He sat down on the grass. beside the headstone and opened Dorothy's notebook again. August 3rd, Katie told Lucy that graveyards aren't sad places. They're like libraries where love stories are kept safe. She said when people visit graves, they're not talking to stones. They're having conversations with memories that never die. Robert smiled despite his tears. That sounded exactly like something Katie would say. She had always found beauty and meaning in places where other people saw only sadness. Katie, Robert said aloud, feeling foolish but continuing anyway. I met a little girl today who says she knows you. She played your song, the one you were trying to learn before the accident. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment Robert could almost imagine it was Katie's voice responding to him. I've been angry for so long, he continued. Angry at the other driver, angry at the rain, angry at myself for not being there to protect you, but mostly angry at God for taking you away from me. A bird landed on Katie's headstone and looked at Robert curiously before flying away. Lucy says you don't blame me for what happened. I want to believe that, but I don't know how to forgive myself. As Robert sat in the gathering darkness, he felt something shifting inside him. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of healing. The first crack in the wall of grief he had built around his heart. For the first time since Katie's death, Robert felt like she might actually still be with him somehow. Not in the supernatural way that Lucy experienced, but in the love that continued to exist even when the person was gone. I think I've been playing my life backward, he whispered to the headstone. But I don't know how to turn the music around. Robert drove home from the cemetery as darkness settled over the city. His house sat at the end of a quiet street in an expensive neighborhood, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars. 3 years ago, this house had represented everything he had worked to achieve. Tonight, it felt like a monument to choices he was no longer sure he believed in. Inside, the house was exactly as he had left it that morning. Clean, organized, and completely silent. His housekeeper came twice a week to maintain the pristine appearance, but the house never felt lived in anymore. It felt more like a hotel room than a home. Robert walked through the living room where Katie used to do her homework while he worked on his laptop. Past the kitchen where they used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Up the stairs toward the bedrooms on the second floor. He paused outside Katie's room, his hand on the doorknob. He had kept it exactly as it was the day she died. Her bed was still unmade from that last Tuesday morning. Her piano books were still stacked on the small upright piano he had bought her for her 7th birthday. Her favorite stuffed animals were still arranged on the window seat where she used to sit and read for 3 years. Robert had avoided entering this room. Every few months, the housekeeper would ask if she should clean it, and he always said no. He told himself he was preserving Katie's memory, but the truth was simpler and more painful. He was afraid that changing anything would make her death feel more final. Tonight, for the first time since the funeral, Robert turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of the vanilla candle Katie used to light when she practiced piano. Her presence seemed to fill every corner, not in a supernatural way, but in the accumulated evidence of a life fully lived despite its brevity. Robert sat down at her piano bench and opened the fallboard to reveal the keys she had touched thousands of times. On the music stand, her copy of Clair de Lune was still open to the page where she had been practicing that final week. He began to play the piece slowly, his fingers remembering the melody even after years of avoiding music. But instead of the sadness he expected to feel, Robert found himself smiling at the memories the song brought back. Katie giggling when she hit a wrong note. Katie explaining to him why certain composers were better than others. Katie insisting that music had magical properties that adults had forgotten how to recognize. Maybe she had been right about that last part. As Robert played, his phone began buzzing insistently on the nightstand. He ignored it at first, but the calls kept coming. Finally, he checked the screen and saw dozens of missed calls from his assistant, his lawyer, and several business associates. With growing concern, he answered the next call. "Robert, where have you been?" His assistant's voice was frantic. "The investors have been calling all evening. They're threatening to pull out of the deal entirely if we can't meet tomorrow morning. Robert stopped playing piano but kept his hands resting on the keys. What exactly did they say? Mr. Chung said they've been having second thoughts about the project. They want to discuss some major changes to the contract, or they're walking away. This is our last chance to save the deal. 3 months ago, this news would have sent Robert into a panic. His entire company's future was tied up in this development project. If the investors pulled out, he would have to find new funding quickly or risk losing everything he had built over 20 years. But sitting in Katie's room, surrounded by reminders of what truly mattered in life, Robert felt surprisingly calm. "Schedule the meeting for tomorrow afternoon," he said. "Afternoon?" "Sir, they specifically asked for first thing in the morning. They have flights to catch tomorrow evening. Then they'll have to change their flights." "Mr. Thompson, I don't think you understand the situation. If we don't accommodate them, we could lose $200 million. Robert looked around Katie's room at the drawings she had made, the book she had loved, the piano where she had discovered her passion for music. None of those things had cost much money, but they had brought her more joy than his expensive house or luxury cars had ever brought him. "I understand the situation perfectly," Robert said. "But I have something more important to do tomorrow morning." After he hung up, Robert continued playing piano in Katie's room. As the familiar melodies filled the space, he felt her presence more strongly than he had since Lucy's performance in the hotel lobby the next morning. Robert woke up early and drove back to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. He found Lucy and her grandmother having breakfast in the hotel restaurant and asked if he could join them. "Mr. Robert!" Lucy's face lit up when she saw him. "Grandma said you might come back." "I wanted to thank you for yesterday," Robert said, sitting down at their table. "And I was hoping Lucy might be willing to play piano one more time." "Of course!" Lucy bounced in her chair with excitement. "Katie told me in my dream last night that you would ask. She said today is very important for you." Dorothy smiled knowingly. "She's been talking about you all morning. Apparently, Katie has more messages to share." After breakfast, they walked to the lobby where the grand piano waited in its usual spot. Several hotel guests were reading newspapers or working on laptops, but they looked up with interest when Lucy climbed onto the piano bench. "Katie wants me to play the song the right way this time," Lucy announced to Robert. "She said you're ready to hear it moving forward instead of backward." Lucy placed her small hands on the keys and began to play Clair de Lune in its proper order. The melody flowed beautifully through the lobby, each note clear and purposeful. But as she played, Lucy began to speak, her voice soft but audible above the music. "Katie says she's proud of how hard you've worked, but she's worried that you forgot why you started working so hard in the first place." Robert felt tears starting to form as the music continued. "She says you wanted to build things that would make the world better, not just make you richer. She says the little girl who loved music and pancakes and bedtime stories would rather have a dad who was happy than a dad who was successful." The melody reached its most beautiful passage, and Lucy's voice became even gentler. "She says you have to choose today between the life you've been living and the life she wants you to live. She says both paths will be hard, but only one will make you the person she remembers you being." As Lucy played the final notes of the piece, Robert realized that his phone had been buzzing constantly in his pocket. The investors, his assistant, his entire business empire demanding his attention. Demanding that he choose profit over presence, success over significance. But for the first time in 3 years, Robert knew exactly what choice he wanted to make. "Lucy," he said when the music ended, "please tell Katie that I understand her message. Tell her that I'm ready to start playing my life forward again." Lucy smiled that wise, knowing smile. "She says she already knows. And she says she can't wait to see what beautiful music you create next." Robert pulled out his phone and, without hesitation, began making the calls that would change everything. 6 months later, Robert stood in what used to be Katie's bedroom, but the space looked completely different now. The bed and dresser had been moved to make room for additional musical instruments. Her small upright piano remained in its place of honor by the window, but now it was joined by guitars, a violin, and even a small drum set. The room had been transformed into a music studio, but not in a way that erased Katie's memory. Her drawings still hung on the walls, her favorite books still lined the shelves, and her stuffed animals still sat on the window seat. The difference was that the room felt alive again, filled with purpose and hope instead of preserved grief. Robert ran his fingers along the piano keys, playing the opening notes of Clair de Lune. Over the past 6 months, he had practiced this piece every morning, both forward and backward, until he could play Lucy's impossible version almost as beautifully. As she had that day in the hotel lobby, the sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted his practice. A moment later, Lucy appeared in the doorway, her grandmother Dorothy close behind. "Mr. Robert," Lucy called out, rushing into the room to give him a hug. "The studio looks amazing." In the months since their first meeting, Lucy and her grandmother had become regular visitors to Robert's house. What had started as an impossible supernatural encounter had grown into a deep and meaningful friendship. Dorothy lived only 3 hours away, and she often drove down on weekends, so Lucy could spend time learning music with Robert. "Are you ready for today's lesson?" Robert asked, settling onto the piano bench. "Yes, I've been practicing the new song you taught me." Lucy climbed up beside him, her small hands finding their position on the keys. Over the past 6 months, Robert had discovered something wonderful. Teaching music to Lucy felt like having conversations with Katie, not in a supernatural way, but in the joy and wonder that children brought to learning. Lucy's enthusiasm reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. "Before we start," Dorothy said, settling into a comfortable chair they had added to the room, "I have some news. The music program at Lucy's school wants to invite you to be a guest teacher next month." Robert smiled. "I'd love to do that. Music education is something every child should have access to." This was part of the major changes Robert had made to his life after that pivotal day in the hotel lobby. Instead of pursuing the massive real estate development that had consumed his thoughts for so long, he had made a different choice. The phone calls he had made from the hotel that day had been difficult ones. He had called the investors and withdrawn from the $200 million project. He had called his business partners and announced that he was restructuring his entire company. He had called his assistant and told her to clear his schedule for the indefinite future. Many people thought he had lost his mind. His lawyer had begged him to reconsider. His accountant had shown him projections of what walking away from the deal would cost him. Some of his business associates had stopped speaking to him entirely, but Robert had never felt more certain about anything in his life. Instead of building shopping centers and office complexes, he had created the Katie Thompson Foundation for Music Education. The foundation provided instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities for children whose families couldn't afford them. It funded music programs in schools that had lost their arts budgets. It created scholarships for young musicians who showed exceptional talent and dedication. "Mr. Robert," Lucy said, interrupting his thoughts, "Katie wanted me to tell you something." Robert had learned not to be surprised when Lucy shared messages from Katie. Over the past 6 months, these communications had become less frequent but more meaningful. It was as if Katie was checking in periodically to make sure Robert was staying on the right path. What did she say? "She's proud of the foundation. She says music is like planting seeds. You never know which ones will grow into something beautiful, but if you plant enough of them, you're guaranteed to create a garden." Robert felt the familiar warmth that came with Katie's messages. Through Lucy, his daughter had continued to guide him, encourage him, and remind him of what truly mattered. "She also said," Lucy continued, "that you don't look sad anymore when you play piano. She says your music sounds like happiness now." This was true. For 3 years after Katie's death, Robert had avoided music because it reminded him of his loss. Now he played every day because it reminded him of his love. The same memories that had once brought pain now brought comfort and connection. "Should we play our duet?" Lucy asked, positioning her hands over the higher keys. Robert nodded and began the lower part of a piece they had been working on together. It was an arrangement of Clair de Lune, that allowed both of them to play simultaneously, their melodies weaving together in harmony. As they played, Robert thought about all the changes the past 6 months had brought. His real estate company was smaller now, but more focused on projects that improved communities rather than just generating profit. His house felt like a home again, filled with music and laughter and the sound of young voices learning to create. Beauty, most importantly. He had learned to carry his love for Katie forward instead of being trapped by his grief over losing her. The duet ended, and Lucy clapped her hands together with delight. That was perfect. I think Katie was listening. I think so too, Robert agreed. Dorothy stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Robert had planted flowers in Katie's memory. When Lucy first told me about her dreams with Katie, I wasn't sure what to believe. But watching how those dreams have changed both of your lives, I think I understand now. What do you understand? Robert asked. Love doesn't die when people die. It just changes form. Sometimes it becomes music. Sometimes it becomes service to others. Sometimes it becomes connections between people who need each other. Robert looked around the music studio that had once been his daughter's bedroom. Every instrument, every piece of sheet music, every photograph on the wall was evidence of love that had been transformed but never lost. Lucy, he said, I have something special to show you. He walked to the closet and pulled out a guitar case he hadn't opened in 3 years. Inside was the acoustic guitar he had played in college, the one he had put away after Katie's death because music had become too painful. This was my first instrument, Robert explained, lifting the guitar from its case. I think it's time for it to make music again. He strummed a few chords and the sound filled the room with warmth. Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement. Can you teach me to play guitar too? I would love to, Robert said. We'll start with simple songs and work our way up to the complex ones. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, Robert realized he had finally learned the lesson Katie had been trying to teach him through Lucy's impossible performance. Life wasn't meant to be played backward, dwelling on what was lost. It was meant to be played forward, creating new melodies while honoring the beautiful songs that had come before. The backward version of Clair de Lune hadn't been about reversing time or undoing tragedy. It had been about showing Robert that sometimes you need to look at familiar things from a completely different direction to understand their true meaning. Love, he now understood, was like music. It could be played in countless different ways, but its beauty remained constant. And the most beautiful performances were often the ones where different instruments came together to create harmony. Robert looked at Lucy practicing guitar chords beside him and felt Katie's presence in the room, not as a ghost or a supernatural visitor, but as the love that continued to flow through music, through teaching, through connections between hearts that recognized each other across impossible distances. The music played on, forward and beautiful, just the way it was always meant to be.